Hi class, this is Marshall Sponder, your instructor for social media for the arts, and I thought that I would give you an updated assessment 1 readout. The fact of the matter is that I haven't done one of these for about 10 months, and now that we are here, let's, at this great semester, which is 441 students in it, even greater than what we had in the spring, and maybe it's about time to assess how the current class is doing. At the time that I pulled the data on Friday for this particular readout, this screen here, there were, I believe, 359 students, or a little over 81%, that filled out the assessment. And what we can see is that the School of the Arts and Sciences had the great majority of students in this class. That's like, I guess, about 47%. And then we go down to the business school at 16%, and the School of Engineering at 15%. Interestingly enough, the School of the Fine Arts, Mason Gross, comes in at 3.5%, roughly speaking, a little less than that even. So our popularity as a course goes well past the School of the Fine Arts and Musical Arts, and mostly to the larger curriculum of the school. And honestly, many of you have asked me about whether the course should focus on other things besides the arts, and the answer is yes. We did try to, and I have tried to, talk to the business school about doing something like what we did with Mason Gross, and have a separate course for criminal justice, which I guess we have a very small group of students in here, and perhaps the School of Engineering, and even a specialized course for the business school. But really, we hadn't gotten anywhere with that. And so this is what we have, and it just seemed like the efficacy of the course works very well across all the schools, even though most of the examples do go to the School of the Fine Arts. And also, I have a background in fine arts originally, so it was easy for me. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be perhaps here today teaching the thing. But suffice it to say, if we were going and specializing it for, say, environmental and biological sciences, where we have maybe a small percent, here 12, we would actually maybe focus on some examples of environmental studies, of environmentalists that use social media. Certainly with criminal justice, we could have gone into way judges and lawyers use social media, and have that as a module in the course. But most of what we do really goes across all of the schools, so I don't think it really matters much that we focused on the arts, because just about everything you can get out of this course can be applied to any of them. Now, I didn't put the names here. I left out the names, but I did pull the data, and I also this time correlated against what the level that you thought you were at starting. And it'll be interesting because at the end of the course we can compare how many of you started at, say, novice and ended up at intermediate or advanced. But like, if we look at all of these online presence, everything, we see that while there's a couple of outliers here, let me stop this so that the airplane flies by. You have a small number of outliers, like one in particular, and I haven't really checked, to be honest with you, to see if many of you are really filling out the assessment the way I had hoped you would. Most of you seem to be doing that, but I do see some of you like thinking, oh, well, I don't have a blog and I don't have this and that, maybe I should just pick a celebrity and put them in, and that's not like what I was hoping that you were doing. So I did see some outliers there with people that had like 3.5 million followers. I knew it was probably not your personal account, And so I just had to take out all the outliers because that I could find, you know. So, and hopefully I got most of them, because if I look at the total basic here, if we just kind of look at this here, this basic online influence averaged across all of the students, and this was 359. We see that most of you are not developed in video almost at all, maybe a little bit more developed in Twitter, not particularly developed in having a professional page of any kind or a nonprofit page, and therefore your personal account's not going to work with that tool. You're only, you know, like not even a 1 in my assessment of a 5 in your LinkedIn profiles, and nothing to speak about at all of SEO. Maybe a little bit more developed of Instagram in that many of you are active. Don't have much to say about local or and then pretty much your blogs are not particularly reaching that many people, and maybe that's okay. There was a comment from one student that was disappointed that this assessment isn't more qualitative rather than quantitative, and to be honest with you, I think the qualitative assessment, it would be a lot harder to do. I mean, it's not that this is really authoritative in any means. It's just a way to get at something. It's a way to maybe have a conversation about how we're doing that is semi-objective, you know, and isn't just, well, I feel I'm doing well because that's what I feel I'm doing, you know, which is fine. But I'm just trying to take something more objective. Now, when we look at the novice, those of you who thought of yourselves as novice, I guess either before or after you filled out the assessment and said that you were a novice. I don't remember if I asked you before you actually calculated or after. Obviously, your influence is even less if I just segment out that part. I mean, there's maybe the Twitter's the same, but the rest of this stuff is almost at 0. Maybe a little bit of Instagram I think we have here. But it's smaller than the overall average. You can see if you compare these two together, yes, those of you who are novice obviously don't feel you have much opportunity to have developed much of anything, although you may have been active in social media, as many of you point out, but you haven't actually thought of it as an outreach medium beyond your friends. Now, those of you who say you're at intermediate level, in, you know, starting, are a little bit more rounded out than is more, I guess, where we go with the average of the class is probably very close to intermediate if you average out everything. And so everything I said about the overall average probably applies very well. But when we get to those of you who thought of yourself as advanced, and there is only 13 of you, or 4% of the class, you clearly feel that you've done a bit more in Instagram, not in SEO at all, but in LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and perhaps Facebook. So those are the areas, not so much in blogs though. It's interesting. So the very foundation of the course, the first real module except for Course Home, is the blog, simply because the blog's a place to put a lot of ideas and to write sort of almost like a journal, but a journal for other people to read. And then we have one person, well, I guess I haven't really taken a look at, that thinks they're an outlier. Last spring we had 1 or 2 outliers as well, and I would expect in a class of 441 that we would have a couple of outliers. So we have someone that feels that their blog's a 3 and their LinkedIn is a 5. You know, we probably do have some, and I probably need to go back and analyze and look at and perhaps talk to that student and really look at that. But that's how the class is doing. So I wanted to go further and talk about, like, why did the student enroll? Like, why did they do it? And as many of you know, I had run some ads. I have done this in the past, although this time I was a bit more ambitious. I started in, I think, July, but then I stopped, and I started again in mid-August, and while I was in London, and ran them and then upped them to $10 a day. And I just wanted to see this time how effective they were, and what was effective. Because I knew that most of the time people who take my course are recommended by their friends or some combination of a recommendation, word of mouth. That accounts for the vast majority, which is great. It also means that I have to keep the experience really good, so that keeps on happening. So I did a cluster analysis, which is for some of you who are into that kind of thing, and I deal with that a little bit in text analytics that I don't teach at Rutgers, but I do teach elsewhere, that I try to take all of these different things that are over here that many of you in your questionnaires had, you know, picked multiple reasons. So if this was going to be analyzed, you know, for overall patterns, I had a breakdown much like that. Actually, I had a breakdown initially like this, you know, which said that 228, or roughly speaking, 63%, you know, purely took the course because a friend recommended it. And that's 3 out of 361 students. And that's 38 students, or about 10.5%, said that they saw the course in a forum, probably the GPA Booster Forum, which I'm also a member of, incidentally. But I try not to post to it, because after all, why should I post to it? I'm an instructor, right? But you know, I did some of my students do post to it, and I'm aware that this is a place where students could be asking about and seeing stuff. And so I've as a person who creates these kinds of courses and talks about social media, I can't fail to be aware of the possibilities of the channels that my students are in and wanting to be there, just as many of you need to think the same way, you know. And so I probably got about 10 to 11% of my students simply by being present, or having a presence, or being talked about in a Facebook forum. And then probably another 7 or 8% that have just searched around Rutgers and found it, and so on. As far as the ad, I targeted about 11,000 students that were between 18 and 23 that lived within 50 miles of New Brunswick, New Jersey, and was attending one of the Rutgers schools that I already talked about here. That, you know, one of the schools that you had to, say that you were part of it. That way I could get an accurate count, because we do care about which schools are in the proportion in the course. But of all of that, what it really came down to, of the $200 or so that I spent on advertising, I only really got, roughly speaking, 4 students that I could actually say came out unequivocally and said that the ad influenced them signing up, which is about 1.1%. So not better than typical pay-per-click, but not particularly stellar numbers, although I don't want to discount the effect of the halo effect, and the fact that the ads may have, when they were seen, contributed to a decision more like an assisted conversion in Google Analytics, where they may have in fact kept the course more in mind and influenced a decision, but not clearly. And so the question is, it's kind of fuzzy whether this ad actually did anything much for me. But I know it got me 4 students more than I would have had, but I can't really say it got me much more than that. And a couple of you said undergraduate advisors, you know, that's less than 1%. Or, you know, then the reasons start fragmenting out. And of course these are too difficult to really work with when they start fragmenting out and you have multiple reasons. So I did a little bit of unscientific factor analysis here and tried to use the equivalent of a k-means clustering, which I'm very familiar with text analytics, where you kind of look at data and you say, okay, which one of these main reasons is closer to the reason that the student gave. And then you start defining clusters that way. And so what I did is if I went back and did that with all of this stuff down here that I'm looking at here, all of this, that's kind of at the edge, then what I really ended up with, if I had looked at all of this again, is that let me go find my cluster analysis here. If I did all that, then I found that my numbers were much closer to what I had in the spring, where I saw that about 77, roughly speaking, 77.3, almost 77.5% came from a word of mouth recommendation, whether that was a fellow student or other students or a advisor or a relative who had taken the course. There was 77% of you, or a little bit more than that, really are here because someone else told you about the course. And that the Facebook forum, the GPA booster, or the other forums accounted, roughly speaking, for about another 11%. And that those who were searching Rutgers, maybe another 10%. And the ad, if I more liberally cluster, maybe get 1.4%, and then others too. So I was able to say that, yeah, we're almost at 80% word of mouth. As far as the major, I try to do some interesting stuff with the major stuff here, and it's hard to aggregate this data and kind of figure out like what the best way to aggregate it is. So I just went with, for novice, those of you who thought you were novice, the large majority of the class doesn't think they're particularly advanced in social media. And so many of you are in the science and engineering and accounting, again, business school, neuroscience, psychology, and computer. So a lot of you haven't really developed a business sense of how to use social media. And so the course is good. It's good for that. As we start to get to intermediate, we see that it fragments. There's less, people who say they're intermediate than say they're novice. And what we can make out here, engineering is a little bit psychology. Again, you would expect to see this a lot with the colleges of arts and sciences, which isn't really all that focused on promoting. It's a lot of soft stuff, but it isn't really about promoting. And then when we get to the advanced, those who thought they were advanced, you're seeing that the people who would be more likely to fall into the advanced segment of the class are those who already are thinking in terms of business. The Rutgers Business School students are more likely to be thinking about how to promote themselves or how to be promoted or how to use the tools. So that's not surprising, but it's interesting because the course is a partnership between the business school and the School of Mason Gross. And what you see is that yet half of the course enrollees are from the arts and sciences. In other words, the combination of chemistry, physics, psychology, and everything else that falls into the arts and sciences. And yet my course does actually fulfill a need that's apparently missing there. But it works very well for those who self-selected themselves as business students. So that's what I see. I mean, there's probably other ways to cut this data and probably better ways to cut it, but that's what I see. Now, I went through the Twitter followers and just tried to average it out, got rid of the outliers. I figure most of you don't have a couple of million followers and a couple 100,000, and I reasonably came up with about 163 followers would be the average Twitter account. I doubt many of you have even close to that, but some of you appear to have well more than that. And but if I average it out to the wisdom of the crowds here with 361, I come up with about 163, which isn't really bad, you know, for someone that's just starting out on Twitter. And then the free-form analysis that we talk about a little bit, I think, like here I'm looking at why did I take the course, or what did I think about the information. There's a lot of stuff that I was thinking about using text analytics to try to like break it down and run some classification trees and try to, you know, cluster it out. That didn't work out so well. So I just settled with Wordle.net and thought, okay, many of you seem to feel this is a kind of interesting course, that you can learn things that, you know, you really need to do to bone down and increase your presence, and find better jobs, better internships, find out what works, you know, and so on. I think you're all doing those things, and that's kind of what this is saying, although it's lost most of the things. So maybe you think it's interesting that the assessment is going on. Yes, it only works with these kind of quantitative sort of metrics that may not be representative of what really matters to you, but it does show you that there is a way to work with data. And I think in the future I may very well find a way to add more qualitative data into the course. So I hope that this first assessment readout gives you what you need and want and hoped for in terms of how you develop. And this semester I'll be sure to do an ending assessment, which is your assessment 14 readout, and compare them. I meant to do that in the spring semester, but didn't really get to do that. So I'd like to really use this semester and see just how much students really progress. And bear in mind, with some of you who are rushing ahead to write your second and third journal entries, slow down, grasshopper, if I might say it so. Slow down. I have the second and third journals for things that I want you to write about mid-semester and end semester, so don't rush to fill those out so quickly. Give it a little bit more time, let this stuff sink in, and remember that you're achieving what you are able to take with you, things that are natural to you, things that become part of your corpus of the way you see the world, and that's what's really important here. And so take the time to really absorb the material that's been assembled and make it your own. Cheers. This is Marshall Sponder, Social Media for the Arts instructor and course creator, signing out on a beautiful Sunday, which means I should be walking around and doing something besides this. Cheers.